the Toronto Star, I'm Saba Itazaz, and this matters. June is Pride Month, a celebration of the LGBTQ2S+ communities, a recognition of a decades-long struggle for rights and equality, and a reminder that this struggle is ongoing. Two years ago, Pride Hamilton had to face the violent hate of far-right demonstrators on a day meant to celebrate acceptance and belonging. The physical violence lasted an hour, but another conflict began that day that has continued for 2 years now. Pride Hamilton filed an application against the police in the city for failing to protect them that day. It led to an apology by the police chief and the mayor. And it was another reflection of how the gay community, particularly BIPOC, have historically faced hate and xenophobia. But change is coming. Hamilton's LGBTQ+ community is taking their case to the Human Rights Tribunal. And this could have significant implications for marginalized and racialized people who have long felt the terrible consequences of being overpoliced and underprotected. Toronto Star digital producer Brian Bradley joins me to explain. Hi, Brian. It's nice to have you again.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
So let's first walk through the events that started 2 years ago that eventually led up to this human rights complaint. Tell me a little bit about what happened at Hamilton Pride in 2019.
At the Pride event, which was on June 15th in Gage Park, everything was going great for Pride Hamilton. They had a great turnout, a really engaged community. But right as expected, actually, they believe this would happen in advance. Some alt-right demonstrators who have had presence in Hamilton for several months, if not over a year, arrived on the scene, just hell-bent on a clash. They had signs, they were chanting, some people were in combat gear. And in this process, to protect their event and the people who were attending, Pride Hamilton erected a fabric barrier, wanting to protect the scene and protect people from seeing what was going on and upsetting everybody. And in this process, what was a threatening altercation turned into a violent altercation that lasted upwards to an hour of countless people. There was headbutting. Some people had weapons. Some people were tackled. It was just a very aggressive, violent, threatening situation to a lot of people who were together trying to celebrate freedom.
And what did Pride Hamilton say about how the police responded? There seems to be quite a lot of violence that took place.
Yes. So according to Pride Hamilton, police did not arrive on scene for as much as 40 minutes. Which is much longer when people make a call to 911. And there, even as planned, there were police officers on scene in the perimeter of the park. But for questionable reasons, those officers, it took a very long time to respond to that scene, and upwards to 40 minutes for as many as 50 police officers to arrive. And that, according to Pride Hamilton, was a deliberate action or a deliberate choice because of a long-standing Pride Hamilton mandate to not have police participation in their event.
Which is not out of the norm, really.
Correct. That is a standard that they had. Actually, that's a very common standard in Pride activities globally and many other activities globally to not invite police participation. But at these events, they're still protected by police. And it is Pride Hamilton belief that they were denied protection because of their desire to not have participation.
Right. And we will go into the complexity of that as well. But were there any attempts to plan this in advance with the police, anticipating this kind of attack or this kind of violence or altercation there?
Absolutely. These alt-right demonstrators who represent a number of groups have had presence in Hamilton for well over a year prior before this Pride incident. They even demonstrate regularly in front of City Hall in the forecourt there. So their activities were known and police had a lot of intelligence into their activities. These alt-right demonstrators showed up at the 2018 Pride event. It did not escalate in the same way. But after that, in terms of planning the 2019 event, Pride Hamilton made multiple efforts to work with police on what they believed was a credible threat that these demonstrators would return. They followed all the right protocols with the police as well as the city and did not hear anything from police until a small handful of days before the event, when police finally made contact with one volunteer organizer trying to plan protection for what was a vulnerable event.
And like much of Canada, there's also a bigger picture here that sort of explains the mistrust between the 2S LGBTQ community and the police. So if we take Hamilton as a microcosm of that, can you walk us through some of that history? What was that history like in Hamilton?
The relationship between the 2S LGBTQIA communities and police has been frayed for a long time. There's some really uncomplimentary, unfriendly history there, even very recently. In 1997, there was a police ambush project called Project Rosebud that ambushed a gay cruising area. And the outcome of that is people who were charged, their names were run in the newspaper. They were publicly outed and the course of their lives were altered. In 2004, there was a very tragic, violent hate crime against a gay restaurateur from Hamilton. As well, there was a bathhouse raid in 2004 where police went in trying to police bylaws and sanitation concerns, but it actually led to charges and frayed relationships with police. So the relationship between communities and police has never been strong. There's never been a sense of allyship. There was a little bit of progress for a while where there was a task force that was set up within police where they were trying to improve relations, improve police working with people who were trans. That had some progress, but even that fizzled. So it really seems like both groups have never been able to have strong standing on the same ground together.
We'll be right back. And in your report, you talk about that there were Yellow Vest members who were involved in the altercations and violence that took place at Pride 2019. How did groups like that end up here? Was Hamilton also influenced by the fallout from the wave of Trumpism that had engulfed our neighbors in the South?
At one time, Hamilton, this was maybe 5 years ago, Hamilton was actually marked as the hate crime capital. It had the most reported hate crime incidents. I don't know if that made the city somewhat attractive to people who are part of these groups, but in light of Trumpism, where we have seen so much increased hate worldwide, it did bring out groups like the Proud Boys, groups like Yellow Vest Movement, and they were very active here in Hamilton. They regularly demonstrated in front of City Hall. They were driving through town. They appeared at other events. There was some anarchist activity in a local neighborhood where stores were damaged as well. So they were very, very present here. And it was something that Pride Hamilton and 2S LGBTQIA communities were just very, very familiar with and very, very conscious of, as well as the police.
Right. So we see all of this history and these groups here, and it's all building up. And we see a lot of that manifested at Pride in June 2019. What has been the fallout from that day? It seems to be a turning point.
Well, conflict after that violent altercation with demonstrators continued, where immediately Pride Hamilton vocalized that they did not believe that the police organization, the police service, had been supportive and responded appropriately. They were vocal about that right away. And demonstrators immediately, not alongside, but in the same space as the alt-right demonstrators, started demonstrating anti-hate at City Hall. And they had a really cold reception from the city as well. A few days afterwards, then police chief of Hamilton Police was on the radio and he flat out said or admitted, no police participation, no protection. He wondered what Pride expected. While he later apologized for those words, it made very clear that, 2S LGBTQIA people perhaps weren't as deserving of protection because they weren't allowing participation.
And that apology came a lot later, I believe. There was an independent review first. Can you tell me about that? How did that go?
Exactly. So there was a report called the Bergman Report that came out that sourced that police response was inappropriate for what the expectations were and what the needs were for such a violent, escalating situation like that. And it came out with 38 recommendations. And the police, according to police, they immediately acted on those recommendations. I followed up on some of them. One of them is that they nominated a volunteer to be an LGBTQIA advisory officer, and they do have that in play. But none of this was in hand with anyone actually in the 2S LGBTQ community. So while they're acting on these recommendations, they haven't aided any sense of trust or relationship rebuilding in that way. And in the days immediately after the release of that damning report is when Pride Hamilton filed with the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario an application that they believe they were denied their rights to protection and denied due process from the city of Hamilton.
Right. And as you mentioned, this independent review was also quite clear about how the police response was not adequate to quell the violence and what happened. So talk me through what happened, what led to the filing of a human rights application. I believe one of the human rights lawyers that you spoke to referred to this as a landmark case. Why is this case so important?
The Human Rights Tribunal application very recently was intervened by the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And that word may be a little misleading, but an intervention actually means the Human Rights Commission is lifting up this case and showing that this case is significant and this case is important. Actually, of note, on the Ontario Human Rights Commission, one of the members of it is a police officer. So he would have seen, and that intervention pulled out and strictly highlighted that discrimination can't happen at the hands of police as a result of under-policing. And so when this finally due process happens, when this either goes to tribunal or maybe it goes before a judge or adjudicators, if an outcome in favor of Pride Hamilton's application will set a precedent for any group, be it a person, two-spirit LGBTQIA person, or Black, Indigenous, or person of color, it will be a case that they can head forward and say, I was denied police protection because of who I am. That is a huge step in human rights case law in Canada.
Right. And this action is a sort of a step and a symbol of a rather long history of the queer community being overpoliced and underprotected in Canada, isn't it? We can talk about how many people feel that there's a different standard of justice, especially for the racialized and more vulnerable members of the 2S LGBTQ people in Canada, right?
Absolutely. A positive outcome in favor of the Pride Hamilton application, what will be a step for anybody to stand on to say that they matter. There are far too many people who can demonstrate that they have not mattered in the eyes of institutions like policing out there. And this will be a step for people to stand on to say that they do matter and to protect themselves and to advocate for themselves. We need advocacy and activism more than ever. And this will be a step or maybe a playing card for people to put on the table to say that they matter.
And we're just talking about this one step, and we don't talk about how it takes so many to do the work to bring about even this kind of shift, even the smallest change. It's the labor of so many on ground. So is this a significant step forward in changing where we're heading on gay rights? What about the issues that the community has been facing more recently in the past decade? Have they changed from the past?
Someone commented to me recently after I put out this story that in the eyes of some people, because Canada has gay marriage now, that there's no more fight left. There's still many issues out there. There are many trans issues. There's the gay blood ban. There's conversion therapy is still allowed in some parts of Canada. There's still a lot of issues, significant issues left to fight as they relate to our human rights. And this is a piece or a step forward in the direction to keep fighting and attaining those rights.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's always great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I appreciate you elevating this story.
I was talking to Toronto Star digital producer Brian Bradley. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Sabai Tazaz, Adrian Chung, and Raju Mudhar. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.